Perfeito. Boa tarde a todos. Eu gostaria de agradecer a presença de vocês aqui nesse evento vespertino. O IBDT está tomando a iniciativa de fazer eventos abertos ao público em geral, como parte do programa de mestrado, um programa de extensão aberto ao público. E nós queremos fazer isso sempre que, especialmente, tivermos visitas de professores estrangeiros. Essa semana nós temos a honra de contar aqui com a presença do Blazej, cujo nome não é escrito exatamente desta forma, e eu nem me arrisco a pronunciar o sobrenome. E ele conheceu o Marco Almada e o Lucas Carvalho numa conferência em Montreal sobre inteligência artificial. Marco Almada, também gostaria de agradecer a sua presença, pesquisador da Unicamp, trabalha numa empresa dedicada a esse tipo de iniciativa. Vamos ouvir dele aí onde é que estamos e como é que isso afeta o direito. O Almada se dedica especificamente ao uso de inteligência artificial na área do direito. E o Lucas Carvalho, que também é amigo, colega nosso aqui do IBDT, dá aula no curso também, está fazendo o NYU agora, e também se dedica à matéria, escreveu trabalhos sobre o tema e vai comentar a questão da inteligência artificial sobre uma outra perspectiva, que é a tributação da inteligência artificial. As conferências vão ser feitas em inglês, especialmente por causa do Blazej. O Blazej fala português, mas ainda está bem no básico. E nós nos programamos aqui para que eles fizessem as apresentações, cada um deve falar por mais ou menos uma meia hora. Se alguém quiser interromper para fazer alguma pergunta ou algum comentário, é super bem-vindo, mas de todo modo nós vamos reservar um tempo no final para perguntas. I want to thank you all for this initiative, and I hope to learn a lot about artificial intelligence and tax law.
Thank you, Victor. As Victor said, eu vou falar português muito pouquinho, therefore I will continue in English, especially that the topic itself is multidisciplinary, it's something emerging, it's very new. Maybe after that you will be able to answer to yourself whether it's worth to invest a bit of more of your time and efforts to expand over this topic. The entire seminar is quite interesting, probably Victor already said to you, but I will first try to share with you knowledge about the possible impact of AI in the field of tax law, and then in general, like very, very general, and then I will make a transition towards the application of AI in a very complex, a new domain, which is principal purposes test. So itself, it's difficult. And I will provide you with reasons why, in my opinion, it is worth to consider building a technology tool that will be able to assist judges, taxpayers, and tax authorities to deal with PPT cases. This is, briefly speaking, agenda. I will start with an attempt to answer the broad question, what is AI, and bring this question into the spectrum of technology and more legal context, tax context as well. So AI is a very broad term, and depending who is using it will define it differently. If you are a startup founder and CEO, you may call AI everything what you have behind your portfolio. And the new research carried on by European Commission and other institutions showed that there is a lot of fake behind the AI under certain tools. Around 40–50% technology which points to AI, they never use it. So it's more like for investment purposes, so it's good to be cautious. But in very general terms, AI can be defined as activity devoted to making machines intelligent, and intelligence is the ability that enables an entity to function appropriately and with foresight in its environment. In other words, AI is non-human subject or object that is able to deal in certain circumstances with certain tasks in an intelligent way. Other term could be that the AI is the project of developing systems endowed with the intellectual processes characteristics of humans, such as the ability to reason, discover meaning, generalize, or learn from past experience. Lucas will elaborate more on AI and will provide you with different definitions, so I will not elaborate on that right now much. In general, AI is a very broad topic, it's a multidisciplinary topic, and maybe to show you on this historical slide the expansion of AI. So in early stage of AI, 1950s, 60s, and 70s, AI was mainly based on the so-called rules, was like good old AI, rule-based AI. In that case, like playing chess and so on and so forth. So you put certain rules in AI that humans use to play, for example, games, and AI become much better than humans because of calculation capabilities which trespass the human capabilities vastly. And then the second stage, maybe like between 1980s and 2010, it's the so-called machine learning, so ability to learn. And by machine, we don't consider robots or big machines, but first and foremost, the algorithms. So if algorithm starts with certain knowledge or certain ability, which is extremely limited, but it can learn from mistakes, like via reinforcement learning. It's called machine learning. And now we live in the era of the so-called deep learning. And Marco, correct me if I am wrong, but I think that University of Montreal is like the source of the deep learning.
Yes, it was one of the University of Montreal where I met him on ICAO, the main conference on AI and law. What is one of the main spots where this technology was developed. Montreal, Toronto, and I believe Edmonton, from where Randy Gabriel came.
Yes. One of the professors from Montreal received together with his research team, a Turing Prize for research in deep learning, and Turing Prize in maths is an equivalent to Nobel Prize. So to remember that AI is not only like one defined in one way, can be defined in many ways and has like different scopes. This shows you how AI interact with the definition of data science. So to some extent, both AI and machine learning and deep learning have like common scope, as you see in the middle, the so-called predictive analytics and database classification models. And both predictive analytics and database classification models can be very useful in tax cases. For example, we may create a tool which will predict the outcome of an application of a given tax rule. In more simple cases, like tax deductible rules, in more complex cases, general anti-avoidance rules, and so on and so forth. So there is interaction between this like data science and AI. This is one of the very early and quite simple examples how we can use statistics, statistical method, and laws in the field of, for example, tax law, the so-called Benford's law. This law tells you that if you have a given number, including more than one digit, 2, 3, 4, 5, or million, billion, and so on, around in the entire pool of all numbers on the earth, number 1 will be on the first place in 30% of cases. Number 2 will be on the second place and so on and so forth. On the first place in the 18% of cases. Number 3 and so on, like on this diagram. So following this law, you can find anomalies, for example, in tax settlements, where taxpayers falsify numbers and you have deviation from Benford's law. This is an example how, by using deep learning, this thing, as you will see on the short movie, learn to run, to walk. So actually it does not know much, like doesn't know how to walk, mechanically speaking, but it sees like certain creatures walking. You will see how funny it is to observe it, how it learns. You can just press here, like play, and it should work. So it looks in the end like after a couple of beers trying to back home. But the thing is that it can do it infinitely. Like we have certain amount of time on Earth to do something in our life to learn how to walk, but it can do it infinitely, doesn't need to eat much, just some energy. Okay, we can move to the next slide. And the next slide, okay, I will, sorry, because this will be, yeah, I think we need to do it by hand. And this also, if you can help me to play it. This, on the other hand, shows you how, by using deep neural network and reinforcement learning, these small pieces will learn how to drive. So this is how self-driving cars are given technology to drive. Yeah. We will skip after a while. It's like on the right upper corner, you see the neural networks that are activated, like the red one are activated, and it analyzes the mistakes and the correct one, and by reinforcement learning, like by giving feedback all the time, it changes the parameters. And you see like the amount of generations in the left lower corner, like how many generations the system will need to eventually go through the entire maze, let's call it. I will move it forward because it takes some time to finally, you can guess actually how many times it needs to finally go through the entire road. Now it's number 7, it's still, yeah. How many times it needs to finally correct itself to the moment that it can go through the road? 25. You think more or less? Let's see. If I can still, oh yeah. Yes, number 15 finally managed to do it. So this is how it works. You cannot find a lot of relations between this kind of AI and law, and you will see why AI is mostly used in different fields than tax law or law in general. Okay, we can go to the next slide, and then I will take over it. So this is like this graph like shows you the developments in AI and in the field of AI and the surrounding fields. This like dark blue round shows you that it's about 5 to 10 years to reach the plateau, and deep learning, it's like, and machine learning are this light blue, which means that it's up to like 2 to 5 years to reach the plateau. And this research picture is from 2017. So in about 2-3 years, we will have a plateau in deep learning and machine learning. We will see how it goes, but it goes quite fast. And now, question to you. According to the research, like there was a question asked to tax professionals, like what do you think in which field of tax law the impact of AI will be biggest? In litigation, legal research, transfer pricing, compliance, indirect tax, direct tax, high-end advisory, or client-facing? Okay. Compliance, some other ideas? Legal research, yes. This is also my choice, actually.
My own guess would also be towards legal research. If you can use AI systems to gather information and to assist people in forming their conclusions in order to enable people to make informed decisions.
And if the question would be about the field of tax law itself, like the way of taxation, you think that more in direct taxation or indirect taxation? Where is the bigger potential for AI? In direct taxation or indirect taxation? No, forget about legal research. You want a tool that allows you to work more efficiently as a lawyer or for your employees. You think that it's easier to build AI tool in direct or indirect taxes? Let's see. Yes. So the most people answered that in indirect taxes, not much in direct taxes, probably because indirect taxes follow a plethora of transactions day by day, right? Like there is even sometimes thousands of transactions in the same taxpayer, like in telecommunication, for example. Like every call is a transaction that triggers certain amount, and this triggers taxation. And big data, as you know, is a food for AI. So the more big data you have, the better AI may be trained in the domain of machine learning, but we can bypass it, and I will later tell you how. There are some research that compared the efficiency and effectiveness of AI system versus lawyer in the domain of non-disclosure agreements. So actually accuracy of AI to scan the NDA for mistakes, for some incompatibilities with the pattern was 94% accuracy, while lawyers were 85%. And now about timing, for a lawyer, for an average lawyer, it took 92 minutes to review 5 NDAs, and for AI only 26 seconds. So it's unbelievable, like outperforming by AI. But in this narrow field, like checking NDAs. So smart approach to AI and tax law is to find this niche that is already ready to be addressed by AI tool, rather they try to build something that it's not ready, like something difficult in direct taxation that I will try to propose. But I here with you share the legal research, but this is just to show you the potential. This is another interesting picture showing you how we could build a system, like computer system, to represent the legal system. So in the higher, like this blue parts of this diagram shows you that the input, which is like the food for AI system, is the will of society. And the parliament follows the will of society, but parliament has short memory, right? Deputies don't have much long, like they remember what they should remember, then it's voting, they say what people want to say to meet the will of society, to get the mandate. But the long-term memory related to will of the society is represented in constitution, in legislation, in case law, right? So then you put this input process, and let's say that you want to transform the system based on the computer program in the legal case. Here we have plaintiff and defendant, but can be taxpayer and tax authority, the same by analogy. So you have lawyers representing the case, you have legal arguments, you have facts, you filter it via system, and then you have the outcome of after the analysis in terms of the law selected to the case, facts selected to the case, and then you apply and you have judgment. So it's like how to do it. This can be done also via the neural networks, artificial neural networks, but probably Marco will say more about that. The use of artificial neural networks in the field of law is extremely troublesome because of the notion of explainability. As you see, in neural networks, we know only the input, let's say the law, the facts, the judgments, and we know the outcome. What the judgment should be, guilty or not guilty, or pay taxes or not pay taxes. But everything in between, it's called hidden neurons. And these hidden neurons are unknown. If we open it, and we call it black box, if we open this black box, the knowledge given to you to explain how the system reached the conclusion is completely useless for legal purposes. It will tell you that the result is like that because connection between this neuron and this neuron and that neuron was 3 million times more frequent than in any other case, for example. So it's a problem with explainability. And it's very important for lawyers like to explain why there is a risk or there is no risk and so on. And this is the example, like different approach, not to use AI to represent legal system, but to write the law by using the code. So instead of writing the law in natural language from scratch, you write the law to, computer experts write the code, like coders. And this is example how you can write a piece of simple law in the code. So in very simple cases, you can completely skip lawyers and judges. It can go automatically. And of course, it also triggers dangers, and Marco will tell you about it. But just to share with you a short anecdote, in 2002, the retired Supreme Court judge in Brazil wrote down an architecture in the narrow domain of offenses in the car accidents. And he shared his architecture with IT experts, and they built the code, they built the system that according to my knowledge, it is still used by judges in the state Espírito Santo in 67% of cases. Because the law is simple, the facts are very repetitive, so the system could be built with very high accuracy to help judges to reach the judgment or to completely skip judges in blatant cases that normally would trigger litigation. Okay, so far like this general introduction, and now I have probably 15 more minutes because we started a bit later, right? So now I will tell you more about AI and principal purposes test. So this gentleman, Benjamin Franklin, as you know, once said that there are only two certain things, death and taxes, but I think he was wrong, and Google can tell him that, Facebook and many of your clients, the taxes are not like death, they are avoidable. Amount of avoided taxes just by 2015 by these 5 brands were up to $700 billion US. So it triggers, a lot of outrage. As you know, we have BEPS, we have ATAT, we have, as a result, general anti-avoidance rules, including PPT. So OECD and EU pushed toward to less predictable norms in order to make tax law less predictable. So I was thinking how to make tax law in the post-BEPS era more predictable, maybe with the use of AI system. And when I was in Singapore, I raised a research question, examine the reasons and possibilities to develop AI in respect of the PPT. So a few words of history. I checked that actually AI from the very early time of AI and law was topic that trigger a lot of interest, and one of the first professors in the field of AI and law, McCarthy, created a system called Taxman. The Taxman in 1972 was able to tell you whether given reorganization of companies trigger exemption or taxation in US, because the rule was quite simple, so he built the system based on his knowledge, based on the rules stemming from the law. But then I checked that in the 1980s there were much more tax systems based on AI in respect of tax law, tax advisor, tax return consultant, and others. And McCarthy made quite interesting point. He namely said that the simplest legal problems are the hardest for AI program because they require human experience, which is alien to AI, but inherent to lawyers. Being highly technical and complex, tax law is very difficult to comprehend and deal with by lawyers, but should not be so for dedicated AI. But it was 1970s. And back then, the ambition of AI and law experts were to replace lawyers, but they failed miserably for our all benefit. The more work was done in that field, the more it was obvious that it is impossible to replace the lawyer, because a lot of tasks very easy for humans, like reading, understanding the text immediately, it's impossible for AI still. And also, to know the law is not only to know the language of law, it's also know the context, the history, the purpose. So the meaning of law may change where the context of application of law changes. There is very few stable, non-flexible legal norms depending on the circumstances. Again, and on the top of it, law is created by humans to regulate humans' behavior, while AI is neither human nor has anything to do with human behavior. Everything is from scratch designed to achieve certain outcome. Also, law is characterized by a lot of complexity, uncertainty, and so on and so forth. So it's very difficult to build AI system. So once they figure out, there are also some research showing you that the likelihood of replacing lawyers by AI is 3.5%, which is very low. By comparison, likelihood of replacing bus drivers is around 89% in the next 5 years, or tax collectors as well. So it's going to the past. And now the point is that in order to build AI system that will be able to replace tax lawyer, we will need to create something which is called AGI, Artificial General Intelligence, a system with capability, intellectual capability comparable to human being. But once you have it, you can, that system can do anything. So why limit it to only to tax lawyer tasks? So in the end, it was paradigm starting from 1990s, AI experts realized that the good way is to build systems that will support work of lawyers, like assistants rather than replacing. It's become obvious. And we have several systems like that. One of them, I think most famous is ROS Intelligence from US. It's searching database using natural language processing. Luminance, it's used to check mistakes and correct them in a vast amount of contracts that normally will take thousands of hours and work of many lawyers. It goes very fast. And the closest endeavor to law, tax law, is Blazej Legal from Toronto, from Canada. This system helps you to predict outcome of application of certain tax law provisions in Canada. But going back to the PPT and the AI, I thought that PPT is quite unique because in comparison to all other legal norms, tax norms, because of certain facts, certain features of it. First of all, scalability is very big because it's supposed to address treaty abuse globally. It's the only self-standing option to meet the minimum standard under BEPS Action 6. It triggers 100% of matches. So of course, depending if you join MLI or not, and you sign a tax treaty with your partner. I know that Brazil does not follow MLI path, but I also know that Brazil will comply with the minimum standard. So PPT will be there anyway. And one of the proof for that is the new protocol with Argentina from November last year. I think the new treaty between Brazil and Argentina, the updated treaty, has PPT. And also, if you incorporate such norm in many treaties, hundreds of them, it will be very rare to change them soon. So scalability is big. Also, I think it's an art to make this rule more predictable. We know the wording. Here is the wording. It contains a lot of unclear, vague phrases, so makes it very hard to predictable. So what if we base AI on rules stemming from Vienna Convention, from BEPS Action 6, from Supreme Court judgments relevant to abuse of tax treaties? In order to ensure the appropriate application of tax treaties, Professor Baker said that, and it was 2016, that the lack of certainty and predictability on the side of PPT makes impossible for him and any tax expert in domain of tax treaties to predict what would be actually the effect of PPT, whether we will really eliminate abuse or maybe we will eliminate the proper functioning of tax treaties, and that will be the problem. It will be a big problem. So why not create a system that will recommend tax authorities how they should apply PPT? So it's not like telling you what you should do, but giving you some suggestions, and each suggestion will be, of course, supported with a proper recommendation, with explanation why in a given case maybe the case should be dropped. Maybe one of the principal purposes was not met, or maybe it should be understood differently, and also AI can understand understand many languages, while tax authorities maybe not. AI can have access to database, like vast database, and analyze database immediately, quite fast. For human beings, it also takes a lot of time. I identified 3 groups of beneficiaries and benefits stemming from such system. First of all, multinational enterprises. System can help them to comply with the PPT and assess tax consequences, and also help them to find proper way to diminish the tax risk by redesigning their tax strategies. Tax authorities can use it to assess the application of the PPT and also assess the argumentation of taxpayers put forward in a given case. So they can evaluate the taxpayer arguments that a transaction in question was conducted in accordance with the purpose of relevant treaty provisions, for example. Courts can use it also. It can assist them in the decision, for example, when it is like clear contradiction between the taxpayer's argumentation and the tax authority argumentation, to find what is more convincing in the light of the PPT and the relevant sources. So I think that there are converging benefits. We can use a computer system in order to make the rule more predictable. And this is very more like soft law, like recommendation. Of course, the tax authorities may deviate from it, but I think that nowadays both OECD, United Nations, and also the European Union is aware that the potential of robotics and the computer system is very big, and they should maybe cooperate with each other, especially on the governmental level, to build such system for tax authorities to make general rules more accurate, more predictable, and because of that, diminish the risk of disputes between tax authorities and taxpayers. The less disputes, the more room for the real international commerce and investments. The more disputes, there will be less room for it. So I think it was not the intention of the OECD. Okay, I will. Okay, so previously, like decades ago, we missed one important point to build a system relevant for international tax domain, namely unlimited access to knowledge, unlimited access to information, tax relevant information that we have nowadays. Now we can find a plethora of relevant sources in internet, and before it was impossible. So once AI is connected to big databases, the potential may be very big. Here I just put like the way how we can build the system. So system can be a mix of question qualifier that ask you the question, you respond to them, and it takes different paths depending on the responses. But also you can build the system with the use of natural language processing, which will allow you to scan documents and immediately make some summarizes and focus on the clauses in the document, clauses that are susceptible for being recognized as PPT risk triggering clauses. For example, special purpose vehicle, and all issues related to the degree of economic substance that can be broken down and taken from the PPT, from the examples in BEPS number 6 and others. There are some technical slides, so I will skip it because this is for much longer lecture. Yeah. So in my proposal, I thought that we should focus on the system which will be relevant for almost all tax avoidance cases, and therefore also treaty abuse cases, because the preamble to the MLI, like the proposed preamble to all treaties under the MLI, says that tax treaties aim to eliminate double taxation, but at the same time they should not create opportunities for double non-taxation or reduced taxation via tax avoidance or tax evasion. So it's not like every non-taxation should be considered as something to be targeted by the PPT, but only non-taxation stemming from tax avoidance. And after analysis, and probably you are also aware of that, I concluded that most tax avoidance cases are cases with almost non-economic substance and or the marginal or almost no business reason or marginal business reason. So if so, we should focus on factors that stand behind the lack of economic substance or a small degree and build the systems with using such factors. One of the most obvious factors is the magnitude of the anticipated tax benefit. If in the result of transaction we have 100 million highs of taxes being avoided, while altogether all non-tax benefits, monetary tax benefits are very minor, like 50,000, then we may say that there is the risk of tax avoidance. But if we find that the taxpayer had no alternative to come to such outcome, because we have some situations where taxpayer cannot conclude transaction actually in given circumstances, other than by obtaining a lot of tax benefits. But this is something difficult to understand, I think, by tax authorities, and with such system that can came to such conclusion much faster, and the system could give them the reasons why it's so. And one of the reasons is like taking a loan where your company has the bad loan history maybe 20 years ago, but the system of the bank still can recognize it, and then the bank tells you, I can provide you with the loan only if you have new company with the clean loan history and the company has 30 million of HIs of share capital. So then you establish such company, SPV, but the company has no income generated, so it's like generating company, losses generating company, and losses can be used as a shield against income to be taxed. And there is also example of captive insurance companies, like if you are in the mining industry, exploit oil from the submarine territories of Brazil, for example, you need to be insured, but insurance is almost impossible to be, at least like some time ago, it was almost impossible to get because the field is very risky, so you need to have your own insurance company. It was called captive insurance company, and you pay premiums to it, and premiums are tax deductible, and this deductibility was challenged by tax authorities because of the big tax benefits stemming from it. But on the other hand, you had no alternative, so system could be equipped with such examples that big tax benefit does not automatically mean tax avoidance, in order to reduce the tension between tax authorities and taxpayers at the beginning. So using my last 5 minutes, I will just share with you one of the techniques which can be used to combine rule-based AI, which is like AI based on rules stemming from a given legal norm, let's say, like from the PPT. Like you break PPT into pieces and you say in the first step, it should be done that, and the second step, and so on. And then how to merge it with machine learning, like how to find the bridge with machine learning. So you may say that the AI system representing the PPT application, in 95% it's based on rules, and only in 5% is based on like pure machine learning technique, which still will be a very powerful tool. So here we can use Bayesian networks or the so-called fuzzy logic. Fuzzy logic is every situation where instead of saying something is black or white, is good or bad, is guilty or innocent, should pay taxes or should not, you rather try to attribute the degree of membership to a given category. Let's say the question is whether the transaction was artificial. So in the end, we want to say yes or no. It's Boolean, yes or no, no more options. But in the reality, it's about the degree. Something can be extremely artificial, very artificial, minor artificial, and so on and so forth. Once we cross the threshold of artificiality, then we may say that the verdict will be negative or positive to the taxpayer. This, I don't know, it's very visible, probably it's too small, but this shows you the 4 elements that are important, like fundamental elements of the principal purposes test to be identified, and then based on this identification, tax authorities will either apply it or not in order to deny benefits or not. The first one is the level of the intention of the taxpayer to obtain a treaty benefit, and it's between like 0 to 100, where 100 is sole, 80 to 100 is essential, 60 to 80 is the main, and 20 to 50 is one of the main or one of the principal. And as you know, the linguistic of the PPT, it uses the phrase one of the principal purposes. And this shows you the correlation between various elements of the PPT. And in the end, it shows you that this is not very reasonable to rely on the linguistic meaning. Why? Because so first you have this intention degree. Second one, you have the degree of the contradicting with the purpose of relevant treaty provisions. And behind that contradiction may be a lot of reasons, a lot of factors. Two most important, again, it's the level of economic substance, the degree of economic substance, and the degree of the valid commercial reasons. And when you take them together, like when it's like 0 to 5 or 0 to 10, it's almost nothing. So wherever you have such low degree of economic substance and valid commercial reasons, you may say that it's a quite high likelihood that the tax purpose was important, was quite high, around 80 to 100 or even 100, and the likelihood to defeat the purpose of relevant treaty provisions was also very high. But when you go to 20 to 50, like one of the main purpose to obtain treaty benefit, then you end up with a correlation which shows you that there is very big range of economic substance that may fall, the degree of economic substance that may fall within the scope of 20 to 50% of likelihood of having the purpose to obtain treaty benefit, namely between 20 to 80. And obviously everything like below 40 even should like I have 20 to 80. I mean, everything above 50% of economic substance or 60% of economic substance should not be seen as tax avoidance structure, obviously. But if you understand one of the principal purposes linguistically, you may end up with it. So this is just to show you on the basic, quite simple mathematics, how mathematics can get rid of certain understanding of PPT. In that case, that element of the degree of principal purpose. Yeah, this is just last year I presented a very simple program how we can use it to see how AI based just on rules can assist you to answer the question whether in given circumstances you can fear the risk of PPT and being applied to deny you the treaty benefits, but we will not talk about that today. Yeah, this is link. I think that with that, I will pass voice to Marco, and he will tell you what risks are stemming from and how to face them application of AI in the field of tax law. Thank you.
Marco, just before you start with your presentation, I actually had a question for Blazej, and I think that it's important for the topic, and I don't know if it would be better to just ask now, probably better to ask now than to wait for all the presentations to ask that, which is probably the central argument that I think some of you at least must be considering as you hear Blazej's words, which is to what extent are we seriously considering using artificial intelligence as some sort of oracle to which we will ask questions about what is the desired goal from a principal purpose test perspective to implement tax treaties in the correct or intended way. And I ask that because if you, for example, today in the medical field, you have the use of robots to a certain degree and the use of robotic procedures, and especially in surgeries, and this is sort of in the first stages of that. But what people are saying today about the future of that technology is that today, people say, well, I'm not going to leave a robot alone operating on this person because I need to have this human doctor nearby just in case, because, you know, the doctor, the robot might commit some mistake, and then you have the human doctor to just... But we will, that's the expectation, we will evolve to a level of technology in which actually it is ill-advised to leave a human doctor together with a robot, because the human doctor will have biases and preconceptions and intuition that the robot will not have, and they will be able to execute it with perfection. And my question to you would be, how would you respond to that idea? Because you said in your talk, you said that ideally the right program, or the ideal program based on artificial intelligence, would give us the reasons why it reached the conclusion that it reached about the transaction having or not having one of its main purposes as obtaining the benefits of the treaty. But what I would say is sort of, and that's the question, aren't we evolving to a stage in which we're going to have one of those programs based on artificial intelligence, that they will have reasoning patterns and formulas that we as humans will not be able to fully understand? Basically, we will know that it's probably right, but even from a tax policy perspective, imagine if you have the AI program say that a specific operation did not have as one of its main purposes obtaining the tax treaty benefit. And then you ask to that AI program, well, why did you reach that conclusion? And then the AI program will give you sort of the rationale behind it. And then if we're not at the stage in which they can't explain to us how they did it, we might have tax authorities, tax judges, tax practitioners saying, oh, but I disagree with that reasoning. You see, because that reasoning, you're placing it at 57 in that scale. I would place it at 61 or 65. I wouldn't place it at 57. And then the whole discussion is going to ensue between whether the AI reached the right result or not. And then, again, that's the question. Aren't we moving towards passing this very important part of international tax policy, because that's what the OECD came up with, the principal purpose test? Aren't we passing that to some sort of oracle that we're going to eventually get to and sort of ask, well, please give us the correct way to apply the treaty? It's going to give it to us, and then we're going to apply it without questions?
Well, that's an elaborative question. I try to summarize now in my mind. Like as I said in my talk, I think that the potential of AI lies with the proportion around 95, maybe 90% of the system based on the rules that you can explain, because when we suffer the lack of explainability, it will be failed to be used in any legal domain. Like you just rely it as on an oracle, like you say yes or no, and I will follow you without trying to find the reasoning. And only remaining 5% may be based on, let's say, artificial neural networks, which is impossible to explain. And now you are saying that if we focus on this 90-95% of AI outcome-based path, which is explainable, and when you see like the reasons why the system reached the 57, let's say, percent of qualification of one of the principal purposes, and human will disagree. I mean, you do like this reverse engineering, and in a given case, facts say that the all relevant facts like the company size, company business type, amount of employees, the location, the reason for trying to find the location, you end up with like uncovering all of this, and the system at the beginning were given certain instructions to give certain weight to each of these factors, and this weight was not, it can be given randomly in the end by like learning process, like we seen on these pictures, or we can ask like top experts what they will give and why, or based on the case law and so on. So you just build a system which is closest to the proper application of the PPT. And in every case, what does it mean proper will be driven by fiscal agenda of tax authority which applies the PPT. So normally you apply PPT from the perspective of the source state, normally, but it can be also the resident state when PPT is being to be applied to deny tax credit or tax sparing or elimination of double taxation method in the form of exemption. But if the source state is a very much taxpayer-friendly state which aims to attract foreign direct investments like Hong Kong or Singapore or Netherlands or Luxembourg, they may give completely different weight that will be given by Supreme Court judge or will be given by tax authority of different country. So it's a matter of calibration, whether you want to stick to Oracle, like the rigid calibration, no matter which tax authority from which country applies the rule, you will say, no, this is something that OECD would like you to do, or EU or some global Oracle-based system. That will be, I think, impossible. It will trigger outrage because PPT is wide by purpose. It is wide because it can fit to a fiscal agenda of every country. But if you leave it as it is right now, the predictability in some cases will be very low for the bad of taxpayers, sometimes for the good of taxpayers, depending which country authority will apply it. Taxpayers friendly and important to attract foreign direct investment, or maybe taxpayer quite aggressive that will understand one of the principal purposes literally. So I don't know which direction will go and whether the AI in general will be in any time soon bespoke to direct tax cases like PPT. As for now, it's more bespoke to indirect tax cases. So maybe it's about 5 to 10 or even 15 years to be built AI which will be used globally in the domain like PPT. Like I think similar time framework is attributed to autonomous AI. It's nothing like in about 2-5 years. It's more like maybe never, we don't know. But I think that in some countries where tax authorities lack the knowledge, enough knowledge about international taxation dynamics, like maybe some African or Asian countries, or maybe even some South American countries, having a tool which is equipped with a lot of knowledge, people doing research in the field for many years, like you or Marco or some professors, Supreme Court judges, giving them this will be more than giving them just the guideline included in the OECD commentary. But for that, we need to agreement with governments and we need to have support from OECD, and then it would be possible. But the question about having Oracle or some flexible system calibrated to fiscal agenda is a very important question, and I think that it will be more about more flexible approach to not take this decision from tax authorities to some system. Yeah.
Well, Lucas's question gives me a perfect a perfect connection to start the main purpose of my talk. That is, today I'm going to talk to you about automated decision making and how, if those decisions made by machines become ever more confusing for us humans, become ever more complex, and perhaps they might even become better performing than humans would, how can we understand what those machines are doing and how can we stay in control if that is needed? Sorry. Okay. Oops. No. Agora foi. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Okay, so what we should consider
when discussing whether how to treat those systems that we sometimes cannot understand, that sometimes can behave, achieve results that are more precise than even a skilled human could, we need to understand how exactly those new systems affect our decision-making loops, and how can we understand what they're doing, and if needed, how can we correct course. And after discussing those aspects, I shall then bring some aspects from existing technologies for human intervention and existing legal approaches, especially those from the domain of data protection, to show how that can be useful when we are discussing the use of automated decision-making within the tax domains. Pode passar para o seguinte, na verdade. Mais that previous slide I just skipped, it was actually well covered by the previous lecture in which we discussed many cases in which automated decision-making could be used by tax authorities, by taxpayers, by judges. And in those cases, you could have AI fulfilling a lot of roles. It could first, as we agreed, it could be a useful tool for legal research. That is, automated systems could be used to identify what is going on a case, identify the relevant facts, identify relevant jurisprudence, or it might do tests such as the principal purpose test that was just well discussed. But you might also have systems, and while current technology has not produced many of those, the previous lecture also brought us an example of a case, namely the identification of errors in non-disclosure agreements. And in that domain, an automated system managed to operate without any human input, and even without that input, managed to achieve a performance that was better than what human lawyers could produce. So if we have here a situation in which automation can affect only partially the ways in which a decision happened, that is, a decision replaces just some of the steps that one would take before taking a decision. AI might replace the way you gather data before deciding something. It might affect the way you consider the possible alternatives by generating alternatives or by choosing between alternatives, but you still have a human involved. That is, the AI just provides information that allows, for example, a tax assessor to decide whether a notice of infraction should be written or not. In that case, we have what we call a human in the loop, because you still have a human being that is responsible for deciding whatever is going to be done, even though artificial intelligence has replaced some of what we would call an intellectual work. If you remove this human from the loop, but still allow that person to exercise some sort of overseeing role, as would be the case in an automated an automated system that could detect infractions, but you still have a person that has to check, oh, this is actually a tax infraction and we should send a notice, or no, this is a false positive, this is a mistake by the system. If you still have a human that can intervene as a supervisor on that system and override the decisions, then we are facing what we call a human on the loop, because the normal way of functioning does not depend on human action, but the supervisor can still fix roles and so. If you remove even the supervising role, you might face what we call a human out of the loop, as you have the human role is restricted to simply defining what goals could be pursued by a computing system. An example of that could be high-frequency trading algorithms that are used to sell and buy stocks in fractions of a second. This time clearly allows no time for a human to say, no, this operation should not go forward, but you still have humans that define the overall parameters of a system, that define how that system should operate and what goals it should pursue. So even if you fully take the human out of the equation, at least in the near future, you still have some things that are not fully automated. For example, the design of a computer system, the idea of what the system is meant to do, the acts of programming, how programming that system to do its tasks, or even the idea that if you have an artificial intelligence that can operate with no human input, you can still define what are the goals that this intelligence should pursue. And in those cases, this human, even though they are more removed from the decision, and they do not affect what's going to be done directly. They just set goals or build a system. They still could be theoretically held responsible for mistakes on the system or goals that are themselves invalid. So why do you talk specifically about keeping a human in the loop? There are two reasons why that would be interesting. First, we have the idea that keeping a human in the loop would allow us to understand what is going on. As a problem that was clearly presented on the previous presentation is that sometimes, for example, when we are dealing with artificial neural networks and other complex systems, we cannot really understand why an automated system decided to label something as compatible with the principal purpose tests or incompatible with that. And if you keep a human with the role of processing data, you could understand what is going on. You could understand what were the reasons that led a system to do something, what were the parameters involved, and so on. And if you have this understanding of what's going on within a system, you can then act on those possible mistakes that a system commits. Because even if a system because to bring that case, that NDA case mentioned on the previous presentation, human lawyers were getting something around 80% of the results right, while the machine system were still getting 5%. But machine errors, the machines probably did not, as is usually the case, the machines could not, the mistakes that the machines committed were not the same kinds that human would commit under the same circumstances, because humans and computer systems handle information in different ways. And so if you have a human in the loop, that human could spot and fix mistakes that would fail the reach of even a well-designed algorithm.
So the accuracy will be much bigger when the human is in the loop rather than relying only on machine learning.
Precisely. You would have a situation in which a human, even if an AI performs better than a human would under the same circumstances, you might have a situation in which the human can fix some of the mistakes of the AI, and then the combination between a human and an AI system would perform better than either the human or the artificial intelligence. And that...
Sure. I think it was Launchbury that said that if an AI system sees the picture of a cat, they would say it is a cat, and then you ask, why is it a cat? And then you'd say, well, then the AI would say to you, well, because I saw millions of pictures of cats, and this picture seems like one of those. And that's not the way humans would describe why a cat is a cat. It would say, well, it has ears like a cat, it is the face of a cat, it is like the whiskers of a cat, and therefore it's a cat. But and that's kind of he used that to illustrate how AI and human minds reason in different ways. So they use different ways to get to the same conclusion.
Precisely. That was actually a very good explanation of this difference between the ways in which humans reason and artificial systems reason. And so, if a human is meant to complement an artificial intelligence or to fix the mistakes that might happen from a fully automated decision, they must actually understand what's going on somehow. They must understand what can be changed, what could be different, and why that machine went to that mistake. And currently, in the data protection domain, a solution for ensuring that knowledge is what is being called a right to an explanation that has been inferred from the Brazilian data protection law through doctrinary. So there are some doctrinary proposals that try to construct such a right to an explanation from the general data protection law, but in some jurisdictions, such as France and Hungary, you have explicit laws that demand a right to an explanation. And what would that sort of explanation be? In the previous presentation, when we are shown the artificial neural network, we could see that it had a decision structure that was very complex. You had many layers, and those layers related with each other on parameters that follow complex mathematical rules rather than the rules that we used to think about legal case. So, when you are going to investigate what is done, when we are going to explain one of our decisions, we can mention, oh, I chose feijoada for my lunch because the alternative was fish, and I am not not much of a fish fan, so feijoada it was. And as he presented, on his cat example, the machine would follow different rules, and so if you are going to reconstruct those rules that a machine used, you would need certain kinds of information. For example, the parameters that were used to configure the automated system, the architecture that is used to formulate that decision. For example, if you use a artificial neural network, that system will follow different rules than an expert system based on rules would. And so if you need to understand what's going on, you need to know what kind of artificial creature you're facing here. And you need also to know how that decision is being used. Is the output of an algorithm being used simply as an input for a judge to consider among other factors, or is that decision something that happens in an autonomous way? It has no human oversight. It is necessary to understand how that is performed. And with that set of information, one could, at least in principle, understand what is going on based on automated decisions, and then derive from that the idea that, oh, this artificial intelligence system has presented a notice of infraction that should not have been presented under the given circumstances. Or, oh, this machine has led to an exceptional case in which it does not fully comply with the legal requirements for this transaction. And once those cases are identified, you could then fix what's going on. And how could we fix errors from the machines, at least in the present time? If those errors are very frequent, you could simply discard the system or do a major redesign. But usually, those systems are getting better and better. As Lucas has pointed out, we are already discussing what can happen when those systems are way better than humans at doing specific tasks in the legal domain, in image recognition, in medicine. Even if those systems are still better than humans, they might commit those occasional mistakes. And if those mistakes are somehow if those mistakes can somehow be fixed easily by a human, it makes more sense to have a human exercise this oversight role than to throw the baby with the bathwater.
If I may say, so short example of picture recognition, AI was asked what to see on given pictures, and there was a picture of Queen Elizabeth II, and she is a queen. So it's normal for everybody, even for kids, to understand that Queen has crown on her head. But AI said with the accuracy of 99.7% that this is a shower cap, because the hair of the Queen were white, and the crown was quite bright too. So and the shower caps are normally bright or white. AI, seeing millions of pictures like that, found that it's correct. So why I'm saying this? Even for a kid, there is a strong correlation between crown and queen. So when you have this linguistic intelligence test, when you have only one word and then you have 4 words to find which word is the closest to the main word, when you have a word queen, and then you will have shower cap, crown, bicycle, and moon, almost everybody will say that the closest correlation between queen it's crown. But for AI, it's the same alien as moon, for example, which is nonsense for us. So when you have human in the loop, this margin of mistakes, although much lower percentage of mistakes than human, can be very quickly, in a very easy way, overridden by human intervention, makes the system being more and more brilliant. And you don't need actually each time human intervention for such mistakes. You can overrule the automated outcome of AI based on the neural networks, for example, with the so-called rule-based system. So you put the rules, and rule will always trump the outcome of the automated system if the outcome of the automated system deviates heavily from outcome expected. And you cannot predict all outcomes expected, but you can at least at the very beginning of the system being functioning put to the system some rules that will override the outcomes. The same in the tax law. When you have transfer pricing issue and you know that certain rules under transfer pricing would be followed, you can put the rules in the system and the rule will always override the automated decision if the suggestion will be obviously deviating from what is agreed under transfer pricing rules.
Precisely. You could have this human knowledge that is not yet treated by those machine systems, codified either by a human directly acting or by rule-based systems acting as a control, and then you can fix those minor mistakes. Because even if the machine committed an error, in that case of a crime, it can usually many times can reach a performance that's still better than a human, but the individual mistakes might be very costly, as I shall discuss later, as I shall mention later. So why would it be interesting to allow humans to make point-wise fixes to automated decision? A first reason would be because it is we are legally obliged to do so in certain cases. If there are obligations that do not allow that currently do not allow the tax authority to delegate certain functions, this tax authority still holds control over what's going on, even if an automated system is aiding them. And so it stands to reason that the authority should be able to ensure that they are not being put at risk, they're not at the risk of validating a wrong decision, but rather that they can fix the final outcome. There's also the matter of legal liability, which is a topic that Lucas will develop further, but it can be very difficult to discuss the legal status of artificial intelligence. It is still a very hot question, and if you still have a human that is responsible for this, ultimately responsible for decisions, you currently sidestep that difficult question. And finally, this main reason that we already discussed, because humans can identify mistakes, might identify sorts of mistakes that would escape from machine learned systems through rules and through experience. And a case that was particularly harmful that was back in 2012, Knight Capital, which was an algorithmic trader company, had a glitch on their software in which the algorithmic trading system, because of a bug, decided to sell every stock they held. And because of that sell that happened in a fraction of a second, they ended up having losses of around $400 million because of a small computer glitch. And that is the kind of mistake that no human, no matter how incompetent, would do by accident. So that provides us with another illustration of how machine errors and human errors are different, and human might complement the performance. And if we accept that human intervention can be an useful tool, to accept that human intervention can be an useful tool, how can we ensure that this intervention happens in acceptable ways? One attempt to do so happens in the domain of data protection law, in which the Brazilian GDPR, Brazilian General Data Protection Law, or the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, have established that data subjects, that is, natural persons, have the right to request human intervention, explicitly request human intervention against decisions that affect them. In the Brazilian law, that is a right to review of decisions that have affected them, that is based on the idea that has not to be a human system. For example, you have this possibility of using rule-based systems as a control for reviewing automated decisions done by a machine learning system. But these rules, since they are based on the data protection law, they are currently restricted to the scope of data protection. So it might be useful as a protection for natural taxpayers, which are natural persons, but as the previous discussion showed, in many cases, AI is more relevant both for the tax authorities and for corporate actors. And so you cannot derive this remedy of an intervention directly from data protection law. But why it would be useful to draw some lessons from intervention in data protection law? First, because to meet those requirements from data protection law, some technological requirements were developed. For example, there's a burgeoning field that is currently under development called explainable artificial intelligence, which tries to cope with which tries to develop new models that can be understood by humans, that you can understand what those models are deciding, that you can understand the factors that were relevant for a decision on another, or that can explain existing systems. And you also have my current field of work, that is that once you understand those systems, how can you ensure that the decisions made by them can be made contestable? How can you ensure that if there's a mistake that affects a person or that the tax authority identifies, how can it be attacked? How can it be addressed through this mechanism of intervention? And so those to some extent, those mechanisms will be implemented through data protection law, but it might be interesting to consider why they would be relevant in other cases of tax. Namely, because because this is not the only part. I mean, data protection law is not the only aspect in which automated processing is relevant. And we have already discussed many examples of how it appears in the tax domain, and if you use automated systems within taxes, the taxation domain, as a tool for the principal purpose test, as in other senses, they will be subject to existing controls to the judicial activity. It will be possible to apply also the controls to the activities of the tax administration, such as the requirement that decisions need to be properly justified and so on. And thanks to that existence of obligations, as well as the obligations that taxpayers will need to fulfill in order to agree with the tax laws, then the right to intervention appears not just as a standalone right regarding personal data, but also as a source of information, as a source of tools that can be used to ensure compliance to law. Namely, if you have those tools that allow you to change automated decisions, then it becomes easier to adapt automated systems to face the requirements placed by law, and in doing so, we can ensure that the existing controls are properly applied to the domain to the automated processing systems. And in doing so, we ensure that automated data processing fully complies with the legal requirements and do not introduce injustice into the tax system. Thank you.
So I think that now we can give the voice to Lucas, and we will talk about the taxation of autonomous AI.
Let's see if it works with me. It works with me. It's just, it's something that they have against you, Marco. It's just, I'm so sorry. So my lecture will probably talk about the other side of the coin. So up until now, we've been talking about the use of artificial intelligence by either tax administration or tax judges or tax practitioners or individuals or companies to apply tax law. And what I'm going to talk about is something else, in the sense that I'm talking about the taxation of a form of artificial intelligence called autonomous artificial intelligence. Needless to say, the two lectures that preceded me talk about existing technology and evolutions of existing technology. What I'm talking about does not exist yet. It is something that futurists believe will come to be in the next decade or so, and it raises interesting questions from a tax perspective. That's why I decided to tackle this subject in a paper, and this lecture is going to be based on that paper, right? So this is the overview. We're going to talk a little bit about the introduction, then elements for a definition of AAI, BEPS issues with the international taxation of AAIs, the solutions proposed, and my concluding remarks. The presentation is relatively short, and I will be available after this event here if you want to ask any questions, okay? So why talk about the taxation of AAI? I hope everybody knows what this is. This is Watson playing Jeopardy. I don't know if you watched this specific episode of Jeopardy, but those two guys side by side to Watson are at the time, they were the most successful players of Jeopardy in history. And they lost miserably to Watson because Watson just destroyed them. And if you watch the show, you're going to see how Watson just basically wiped the floor with them, and it was very interesting to watch. But this was interesting because I watched it at the time when it was released. At the time, I watched it, and it was an interesting thing because it was a different show. It was different from regular Jeopardy, which I had watched before, just a few episodes, in the sense that it was not only a show like Jeopardy with questions and you have to answer the questions with a question, but it was also sort of an introduction to how Watson works. And then you see Alex Trebek walking towards the huge servers that are home to Watson, and then showing this is Watson actually, this is just a totem, you know, with an image, but this is not Watson. Watson is actually here, and then he points to a room filled with computers, and this is Watson. This is what you're seeing up there. And then at the time, what was said was, well, this is groundbreaking artificial intelligence in the sense that Watson can now understand the specific kinds of questions that Jeopardy asks, because Jeopardy gives you the answer and you're supposed to answer with a question. And it's a very, the questions have double entendre, they have nuance, they have different meanings that might be given to words. And you could see for every answer how close Watson was from 100% of certainty that that answer was the right answer. So, why talk about the taxation of AAI? Evidently, Watson is not an example of AAI, as we're going to see in a few minutes. I wanted to talk about the taxation of AAI because I started to notice a trend in papers about taxation of technology. Specifically, there was a paper that was partly an inspiration to my paper, which was Professor Xavier Berson's paper about the taxation of robots. And in his paper, he talks about, his paper is much broader than mine because mine is focused on international taxation of income. He talks about payroll taxes, VAT, income taxes, and so on. And in his paper, he talks about taxing robots as individuals, as if they were individual employees, and taxing the company. And every time, not Professor Oberson, but every time people would refer to his paper or talk about the taxation of AI, for example, like Watson, or income produced by Watson, everybody would say, oh, you just tax IBM. It's very simple. I mean, there's no question about how to tax Watson. You just tax the company that owns Watson. For example, Siri, if Siri produced income, you tax Apple. If Sophia, that robot that can walk, talk, recognize human emotions, if Sophia produced income, you just tax Hanson Robotics, which is the company that makes Sophia. And then you just tax the company. You just tax the company and it's done. Very simple issue of taxation. And I asked myself, well, what if there's no company behind that artificial intelligence? What if the artificial intelligence is quote-unquote self-standing? Can I still say, well, you're going to tax the company, but there's no company? There's nothing. There's nothing behind, this instantiation of Watson. And then the idea of researching about different forms of artificial intelligence and what people were talking about when they said autonomous artificial intelligence came to be. I decided to start that research from there. And that produced this paper, which I know some of the people here, I sent the paper to. And if you don't have the paper and you want it, just talk to me. I can send you a PDF of the paper. It was published in May. And it talks about specifically unique BEPS issues created by the taxation of autonomous artificial intelligence, because I was bothered also by something that the OECD said in BEPS Section 1. We're going to get to that. But that was the paper that I wrote and I published gladly in Intertax, and this is kind of a summary of my paper. So, if you want to read it, I welcome that, and you can always ask me questions afterwards. Okay. So before we talk about the taxation of AI, of course, we have to talk about what AI is, because we need to know what it is or how it is defined. Even if it's not existing technology, we need to know what it is. So artificial intelligence, according to Merriam-Webster, may be defined as the capability of a machine to imitate intelligent human behavior. Now, you had also definitions that were given by Blazej, and definitions that are given in other specialized literature. And my interesting but more favorable definition would be this one by Halen and Kaplan in a paper published this year, but a little bit earlier than mine. AI may also be defined as a system's ability to interpret external data correctly, to learn from such data, and to use those learnings to achieve specific goals through flexible adaptation, right? So this is kind of a holistic definition of what AI is supposed to be. But you will see that AI, not AAI, AI can be defined in a multitude of ways by different authors, so it does not have a single definition, and especially if you go into classifications of AI, which we will go into now. So back in 1980, John Searle wrote about the difference between what he called weak AI and what he also called strong AI. So weak AI is what he at the time said is a computer that gives human beings a powerful tool to assist them in their tasks. Kurzweil in 1999 prefers to use the terminology narrow AI, and Diamandis and Kotler basically follow Kurzweil's terminology. The strong AI would be a form of artificial intelligence that has a mind similar in its intentionality to the mind of a human being. John Searle at the time said that intentionality could never be reproduced by artificial intelligence because that belongs to the human experience, belongs to biological experience. And Kurzweil said, well, we can dispense with intentionality and simply describe AI, strong AI, as a functionally equivalent recreation of the mind. That's basically how he described it. And Diamandis and Kotler follow that position as well. So you can see we can even this distinction, which is not very useful for AAI, but it's interesting for us to know how authors describe AI in different ways. Even this distinction, you can see that there's like a difference between AI that serves us and AI that is equivalent to us. So AI that serves us is what we're going to see in the future, like TurboTax. So TurboTax is not very well known in Brazil, but in the United States, TurboTax is what you use. You input all the information that you need into TurboTax, and TurboTax will give you the taxes that you need to pay and the rates and everything. And it basically contains stored knowledge. So it contains stored databases and knows that if you earn income derived from manufacturing something, that income is subject to this tax rate and it should be paid in this manner, and this is the form that you need to pay, and it will give all of that to you. So that helps us. But TurboTax cannot earn the income that I earn and then pay the taxes on that income. TurboTax helps me by complying with tax law, and then I can go on my way. Whereas strong AI has a much more different connotation in the sense that strong AI can be me. I can sort of compete with me, can do the things I can do, at least in the minds of Searle and Raymond Kurzweil. So this is kind of one distinction, but you have other distinctions in specialized literature, like this one, which to me is closer to what we need for our presentation now. Launchbury in 2017 and Jones complemented that with a fourth wave in 2018. They refer to waves of AI. So they refer to waves of AI development. And in the first wave between the 1970s and the 1990s, it's what he calls handcrafted knowledge, good reasoning, but not no ability to learn or generalize. He gives examples like Deep Blue or TurboTax. You know, you can store the knowledge and you know, for example, Deep Blue at the time was revolutionary because Deep Blue not only knew how to play chess, Deep Blue had all the games played by all the grandmasters in its memory, and Deep Blue basically was the kind of player that had seen everything. So you're playing someone that had seen every move, that knew every move because every move had already been stored. And at the time, I remember there was a presentation by Ricardo Semler, which he gave at MIT years and years and years ago, and I think he still gives that presentation today. But he gave that presentation then, and he said, I'm not so surprised that Deep Blue won, I think it was 4 out of 7 matches or something, or 3 out of 5 matches. I'm not surprised that Deep Blue won 3 out of 5 matches or something. I'm surprised that a human won 2 against Deep Blue. How can a human want to? And then at the time he said, well, it's basically, it has to be, that has to be chalked up to intuition, which the machine doesn't have, and basically makes human beings create strategies that from a machine standpoint are completely flawed and will never work. But for in the mind of a human, they say, no, but this, I know that this might not work, but it might lead my opponent to do this, and then I can do this. And then that's kind of the intuition that was missing at the time. But if you compare that, even if you compare that to today's game-playing artificial intelligence, like for example, Google's AlphaGo that plays Go. Google's AlphaGo is much more developed in the sense that it uses artificial neural networks than Deep Blue ever was, because it knows how, not only it knows it can replicate intuition, so to speak, and it has been very successful in defeating even the most advanced Go players in the world. So the first wave, handcrafted knowledge. Second wave, which is the wave that we're living in right now, is statistical learning. So you have picture recognition apps, you have your Alexa, you have your Siri, you have your Cortana, you have those assistants that know how your voice is and know when you say, what's the weather, they know what kind of response that you need to receive, and they can learn because of statistics. So they know, for example, that from the last 10 times that you asked this, that, and the other, your next action was that, and therefore I'm going to do that because this was this next action. It's a little bit about like the cat picture, in the sense that you have a cat picture and then I can say that that's a cat because I've seen a million pictures of other cats, and human beings would not usually say that. They would say, well, this is a cat. Human beings also know, which is something that now it's easier for AI, but for primary instantiations of AI was very difficult. It's something that kids have trouble also with, very young children, distinguishing between a cat and the picture of a cat. So I can say, well, this is a table, and then I can show a picture of a table, and I can say, well, what is this? And then it takes a leap for you to say, this is a table. Because you're saying, no, I know that this is not a table, but this is the representation of a table in a picture. Because, you know, if you're for primary instantiations of AI, if you show that to them, they will say, well, this is a photograph that you're holding in your hand. You know, the thing in the photograph, okay, then I can describe that. But this is not, this is different from this, of course. And then third wave, next decade is expected. It is contextual adaptation. I chose Samantha. I don't know if everybody knows what Samantha is. Samantha is the artificial intelligence in the movie Her. Spike Jonze's movie Her. And it involves contextual adaptation because it's able to generalize, and it's able to do more than just give you information that it knows from a database or learn from your, because you do this, that, and the other. It can do something that you're not expecting because it can learn from contextual adaptation. But even that is sort of an example that I just gave to sort of highlight what it should be like in the third wave. And in the fourth wave, able to perform any intellectual task that a human can. It's what we call technological singularity. It is a stage of technological development that we can only describe. We don't really know what it's going to be like. It's going to be developing technology that is able to rule us. So that's why I chose Skynet. If you don't know what Skynet is, you should watch more 80s movies, because that's from Terminator. And that's sort of the artificial intelligence that rules the world and just destroys everything. And that's what we fear. That's what Elon Musk feels, that we're going towards. We're going towards that. And that Sam Harris has a presentation of that, basically saying we're slowly but surely creating a god of sorts, because we're creating some sort of thing that we can't control or understand. As I said in the question about the oracle, you know, now we can understand why for example, if I ask Watson why it came to the conclusion that the Rio Olympics was the Olympics that was recently hosted in Brazil. It's going to show me pictures of news articles, and then it's going to show me pictures of the Olympics in Rio, and it's going to show geographical location. It's going to say, well, because of those reasons, that's why I concluded it would happen in Rio. But it might get to and that's the expectation. It will get to a point in which the answer is not going to be something we understand. We just know that it's the right answer, but it's not something we understand. We already see a couple of examples of that today, and I cite one of them in my paper. It's about, for example, there was an experiment that was carried out, I think, in 2017, about the design of an airplane door. And then you think, okay, a design of an airplane door, I mean, simple. You have engineers that know this back and forth. They can do this easily. So what they did was they just gave the premises, they gave the basic roots of the how to design an airplane door to an artificially intelligent program. And it designed a door that you'd have to see the presentation to understand. It designed a door that is a door. Yes, it does all the functions of a door, but it looks like a puzzle. It's all sort of, it has holes in it, and it's kind of it's a spider's web kind of engineering that no human would ever have thought of. But then they said, well, but oddly enough, it's more resistant, takes less material to build, it's more efficient, it will protect passengers better, and we never thought of it. And that's the thing, that they are still able to know why that's better than anything else. But we might not be able in the future to know, well, why exactly did you conclude that? And then the oracle, as I said, the oracle might answer to us, well, it's just very complicated for you to understand. But, you know, it's something that we have to keep in mind, because, you know, as I think Sam Harris says it best, in every discussion about the evolution of artificial intelligence, there seems to be a group or a current in the mainstream that sort of wants to forget or not consider the possibility, the very real possibility, that it will evolve into something we cannot control. So it's something that we have to keep in mind. So that's another definition of AI, but there's one that comes a little bit closer to what I want to explore in this presentation, which is Halen and Kaplan's. So Halen and Kaplan, they talk about three kinds of artificial intelligence. And we've seen a couple of them in the previous presentations, I think, in the previous slides, and I think we can sort of understand what they are. The first generation is what we see today. When we talk about AI today, we see what is in the first picture there, and I know it might be a little bit difficult for the people in the back to see. Those are robotic hands cooking a meal, and that exists today. That's called MOLI, and MOLI will intentionally, the idea of MOLI is for you to just say, well, first of all, you have to have the ingredients in specific places for MOLI can get those ingredients. But if you have the ingredients, you say, well, today I want a lasagna, following this recipe, and MOLI will do it for you with just perfection, and every time it will follow that in perfection, and that could be the death of restaurants, and we don't know. But you know, it's the idea that it's this artificially intelligent program that basically knows recipes and will execute them. You know, and when we talk about this, today it's like I'm talking about sci-fi. It's just science fiction, Star Trek kind of stuff. But it's really rudimentary if you think about it. It's just I know the recipes, I know how to execute them. That's all I can do. So, you know, Molly cannot drive your car, Molly cannot cure you from a disease, Molly can do one task, and it can do that task really well. That's what we call artificial narrow intelligence, or ANI. AGI is something that we haven't seen yet, but we're coming to that, which is human-level artificial intelligence. So the same way that I can speak at a lecture, but I can also play the guitar, but I can also swim, or I can do, as a human being, I typically can do many things with varying degrees of quality that I can do those things, but I can do many things. And the idea of artificial general intelligence, which I just picked Samantha because it's closer for us to understand, but it's not really Samantha. It's human-level artificial intelligence. So it can do what we can do, but with a computational capability far higher than anything that we know, because it can access content very quickly. It's basically like me giving a lecture and then saying, well, what's the income tax rate in Slovakia? And then just saying, rolling off the top of my tongue, because I know that information, because I'm connected to a database that is just feeding that information to me. Actually, that's something that futurists say very close for us, you know, us becoming androids, in the sense that we have that information rolling off our tongues whenever we need that. And the third generation is artificial superintelligence, which is basically Skynet. It's basically something that controls us rather than we controlling it. Needless to say, anything that I was to talk about taxation of autonomous artificial intelligence stops at around here. So there will be some sort of limited artificial superintelligence that we might consider, but if we're talking about this reality, I don't think that we will be the ones discussing taxation of them. Maybe they will be discussing taxation of us. So that's basically, I know. And we were talking, 2 lectures in which we were talking about existing technologies. All of a sudden it started Black Mirror in this episode. Just, it was all kinds of sci-fi comments, but that's the nature of my research. So how about AAI? It does not have a specific definition in academic literature. It does not necessarily represent a stage of its evolution. It is conformed by certain rules. So I can say, for example, I can view a form of AAI that would be better described as ANI because it executes one task really well, but I can also see it as any AGI because it has human-level intelligence. It's not about the stage of its evolution. It's more about rules that define it as autonomous, which is the most important point. It is autonomous artificial intelligence. It's Watson without IBM on its background. That's basically it. It leans towards the idea of a self-standing AI, and the definition is admittedly more leaning towards legal and tax concerns. So in my research, I tried to find different ways of describing AAI, and I found a few authors that kind of come close to describing autonomous artificial intelligence, but I realized at the end of it that if I wanted to analyze it from a strictly legal tax perspective, I would have to devise those rules and establish those rules myself for AAI. I didn't find opposition against those rules in the specialized literature, and actually some of them say it is kind of like that is self-standing in the sense, but those are the 3 rules that define AAI. This is the subject of my paper and basically the subject of the tax issues that I'm going to talk about. There are 3 rules for AAI. The first one is it is capable of performing tasks associated with human intelligence and beyond, and that's kind of basic, you know, it's just artificial intelligence is supposed to do that. It is what I would say is sophisticated ANI, any AGI, and limited ASI because full ASI is outside of our scope. Rule number 2, it is not controlled directly or indirectly by human beings. Of course, you know, if it's controlled by a company, it's still controlled by human beings, and the point is it has to be not controlled by human beings. And that's kind of an important point because it leads us to the difference between control and containment. So if I say, and that's something that I explore in my paper as well, if you read the literature about artificial intelligence and the evolution of artificial intelligence, every time they talk about someone holding a kill switch, and basically a kill switch is a button that you press when you see that the artificial intelligence has started killing people. And then you say, well, I'm going to press this button and it's going to destroy you. So that's what they call, this is actually one of the, in the specialized literature, they say this is a kill switch. And you have other mechanisms to what they say control AI. But if I bring this to the legal realm, if I bring this to the tax realm, then I start to see a distinction between what they call control and what we would call control. So control for legal and tax purposes is controlling the actions of someone. So for example, if I say that if I have a company that has control over a subsidiary, if I say control, actually in Brazil I would say significant influence of its actions. So significant influence means I will say, instead of investing in this project, you're going to invest in that project. Instead of doing this, you're going to do that. Instead of hiring this CFO, you're going to hire that CFO. Because I am controlling your sort of, to a certain extent, your day-to-day actions. Containment is very different. So containment is, if you don't violate very general principles and very general rules that I establish for you, you can continue operating as normal. You know, only if you don't violate those very general rules and very general principles. But if you violate one of them, I'm not going to change your action. I'm not going to modify your action to this. I'm just going to press a button and then it's going to disappear. Or I'm going to deny you access to power grids, servers, data, which would be rewards for an AAI system, and according to the specialized literature as well. I'm going to deny access to those things. So if I deny access to those things because you fail to sort of comply with those very general principles, that's more of a containment scenario than a control scenario. And that distinction is very important, because if I'm talking about control, I'm still talking about an AI, and I would agree with the people that say, well, you just tax IBM, you just tax Apple, you just tax the company that controls it. But if I'm talking about containment, then it's a different scenario, because rule number 3 says full managerial power over its own actions and resources, which means that I have the kill switch in my hand, but I cannot access the virtual wallet of that AI, in the case an AAI. So I don't access that money. I can't do anything with that money. That money is theirs, whether it's in Bitcoin, Monero, Ethereum, or actually fiat currency. But you know, it's just a virtual wallet. It just has money that I can't access. And they can do whatever they want with it. They've been pre-programmed with it, and they can do whatever they want with that. We have some form of that today. It's not AAI, but it's something that is called a DAO. Decentralized autonomous organization. They have forms of DAO. You have, for example, the Plantoid, which is a form of DAO that is sort of controlled by many, many people that use Bitcoin, that are in the blockchain using Bitcoin, and those people have control over Plantoid. And Plantoid basically works as a virtual wallet that receives money from admirers of actual technological, physical plants that exist in museums and spaces. And then I look at the plant and I admire the plant and I make a donation to the virtual wallet. When the amount of money in the virtual wallet reaches a certain level, the DAO, the actual program, hires people, physical human beings, to build other plants. And then they build other plants and people make money, and then it's just more plants. And that's very, very rudimentary, but you know, you get the idea of something that is programmed to use the money without me intervening or getting access to that money. So that's basically what AAI is. Now there's a burning question, which is kind of like the question that I asked Blazej at the end of his lecture, which is basically why? Why would anybody, because if you think really, Watson, what a powerful tool it is to just access information, and even for the medical field, I mean, I can get diagnostics and just so amazing. Why would I create something and then leave it with just no control over its income? I would just have a button or, you know, some sort of containment scenario in which I would contain it, but I wouldn't control it. Well, one very important reason for that is compliance costs. So for example, if I have a sector of my business that is very costly from a compliance standpoint, but doesn't produce much money, one alternative would be for me to create an AI that services not only me, but my competitors as well. They do exactly that thing. They have to comply with the legal standards, regulatory standards. I don't have to comply with any of that because I only hold a containment. I don't even benefit directly from the income that it receives. I benefit because it provides me a service, but it provides everybody in the market a service, not only to me, right? So that's one way that you can see it, other than for, you know, selfless philanthropical reasons, or I just want to leave it working its way through the world. I can actually think of an economic reason why it's better to just have it there. And as I said in one of my interventions, you might have a situation, a very possible situation, in which the technology is so developed, so far advanced, that it will actually be useful to not have humans as part of the process, because humans might make it worse. You know, we say that today with varying degrees of certainty and correctness, but we say that today about cars. You know, because a lot of people say, you know, well, you have these assistants that can drive the car for you. You have these driverless cars. And then you say, well, you still have a human being there, because just to make sure that if the driverless car just, you know, threatens to hit a lady or a kid in the streets, and then you can veer it off. Well, that's assuming that it's not technologically advanced enough to know that it's not supposed to do that. But if we say, well, it is technologically advanced, so why do you need a human being there? For the human being to overrule an action that was based on statistical learning, data, and so on. It's all about the evolution of the technology. As was said in Marco's presentation, the degree of the mistake might be very, very high, and it might be one of those cases in which, my goodness, no human being would make that mistake. So that's a problem, and that has to be, you know, built with more and more knowledge and more preparation until you have a stage in which you can dispense with human intervention. The two issues that I sort of thought that were related to AI have to do with BEPS Section 1. And in BEPS Section 1, the OECD says that there are no unique, they do not generate, the digital economy and its business models do not generate unique BEPS issues. The key features exacerbate BEPS risks. Because of course they're thinking about what we currently think about when we think about the digital economy. We think about Amazon, we think about Google, we think about Facebook, we think about companies run by humans who design and do things in the digital space. But we don't think about AI players side by side with human-led companies. We don't think about that because it was never something that was presented to us. And I agree with the OECD, this is more of an academic exercise than it's sort of a practical exercise, because they don't exist today. But it is senseless to say that it doesn't raise unique BEPS issues. It does. It just requires you to take away one of your premises. It just requires you to take away one of your preconceptions about the digital economy. So the two issues, basically. There are two main issues, and these are sort of more tax-related, more the kind of thing that you would expect to see at IBDT. You know, this is the issue of disappearing income, right? So what is this issue? It is closely related to the lack of legal and tax personality. Imagine that you have a company, Exco, that hires a service, any service, might be a technological service to make it more easy for us to sort of wrap our minds around, a technological service like the survey of data from my machines. I want to know if my machines are operating at the maximum capacity or if they have any trouble that I need to fix them. So I'm going to hire this AI to provide that service for me. The AI is going to enter my system, make that analysis, give me a report, and that's going to be its service. And I'm going to make a payment to its virtual wallet. I just said state Y, and I actually put a question mark here because, I'm saying state Y because it's easier for us to understand, just to say that it's not in state X. Right. In this scenario, under the current tenets of international tax law, Exco would see a payment leaving its borders, but it would not be able to impose a withholding income tax because that person that is receiving the income tax isn't a person from a legal or from a tax standpoint. At the same time, if I were to say, well, I can sort of argue that there are reasons to say that it is based on state Y, I still can't say anything about state Y because state Y also will not recognize that as a person. And therefore, if it's not a person, it's disappearing income. I just pay it and it disappears from a tax perspective. I can't attach it to anybody that I can call a taxpayer. Not a company, not a person, not an individual, not a partnership, not a trust, not anything. So that's kind of the issue of disappearing income. Seems pretty straightforward to understand. And that's sort of like the first issue that I realized, and that there's a solution that I proposed for it. The second, there's also, before the second issue, there's also this other example. Imagine that the company that built the AI is in state Y. Imagine that, you know, instead of one company, it's just people playing a game that the AI hosts and operates. And imagine that the servers are located in state X. Now I created a lot of links that I could sort of attach them to. Still, even if I could say that there is an argument that could be made for residence in state X because the servers are in state X, even if I were to say that, I still couldn't say that that is a taxable person, not under current law. So that's the first kind of issue. It is not a taxable person. Therefore, income paid to the AI cannot be taxed. That's the first issue. But there's a second issue, and that is powerlessness to tax. Now, this is just one slide, but it is very complex. So imagine that the AI runs a factory, right? So it runs a factory that does anything. I mean, in my paper, I talk about robotic bees, but that's because I wanted to just, you know, shock everybody. But they do exist today, but, you know, you don't have to resort to an episode of Black Mirror to understand this. So you have a factory that does, you know, that either sells goods or provides a service to clients in state A, right? So the service is provided and the payment is made. Now, imagine that we're living in a world in which AI is regarded as a person, right? AI is known as a person in this world that we created. So AI is known as a person. We still have a problem with residence because we still live in a world, we might be changing that with BEPS 2.0, 3.0, you know, we're moving towards new instantiations of BEPS. We're still living in a world that is mostly divided into source and residence. Source might be going away, being replaced by market country or so on, but residence is still very much alive and kicking. It's still very much doing well. And we don't know because the company that built the AI, as I said, does not control it, does not have control of its financial resources. So therefore, I cannot say that that company is some sort of magnet to attract the residents of the AI. I can also not say that about the servers. The servers today, we have permanent establishment cases about servers being used by companies, and some courts have said that the servers may be able to create a PE. Other courts have said that they may not, and this is a debate today, but I can still not say under current law that the servers of an AI are able to create a residence link for that AI. I can also not say that the residence is in the market country for me, and under current law, that's confusing the two notions. But this is something that in State B, Professor Xavier Berson told to me, because other than the paper, I don't know if you guys read the blog, the Kluwer International Tax blog. In the Kluwer International Tax blog, I've been doing this series of professors and colleagues asking questions about AAI, and I respond to those questions. And one of those posts is me and Professor Xavier Berson, who wrote that paper about the taxation of robots, and he says, well, one of the links that you could create for residents is the country that was most affected by the existence of the AAI. So suppose that this is a factory that provides data analytics and services for companies and companies that have machines. Suppose that before the existence of that in state X, state B, which was close in proximity, you know, they share a border geographically. State B had like 100 companies that provided the same service, and that provided income for people at State B, and it provided wealth and quality of life. Now they have nothing. They have none of that because this has very low cost. It has some cost. It has the technological cost attached to it, but it doesn't have the cost that this has. So Professor Oberson said we should give, and that's more, it's not so much a residence link, but it's more like a solidarity, tax solidarity link, that we should create residence for this because this is the place of residence. Because if this didn't exist, this would be its residence because these are the companies that provide it. You know, it's a point that he made. It's not in my paper, but it is a point that he made, and I take into consideration. Those are the two issues. Quickly going to the solutions that I proposed, right? So there are only two solutions, one for each issue. The first one, relatively simple, straightforward to put the solution into place. It's not very simple or straightforward to argue for the solution, because there are people who are strongly opposed to that. I mean, some of you might be here today actually that are strongly opposed to this. Giving taxable personality to AAI. So it would have the taxable personality status, as I see it, of an individual. Equal to an individual, would be taxable just as such. And that, you know, we have issues of administrability, because if you have someone known as a person, how do you tax them? Do you tax them by just creating a rule that every time for AAI, you're going to create withholding income taxes? Every time. Because you make a payment and it's cross-border, the AAI is going to be subject to withholding income taxes. Otherwise, you could say the container, the person that holds the kill switch, is the one that has to pay the taxes for the AAI. I would be personally against that. I think that as a society, we will come to a situation in which we are against that, because we want to stimulate containers. We don't want AAI loose without any container. We want people to be containers, but we don't want to place undue burdens on them that would sort of make the containment job less easy. And that sort of raises a question. As I said, it's a paper that raises a few questions. I can't answer all of them in the paper and this lecture, which is giving taxable personality to AAI requires application of tax principles to AAI. So are we ready for that? I mean, first of all, some of you might disagree with the premise that we should give taxable personality for AAI. If for those of you that are not, for those of you that think, well, it is an issue, it's disappearing income, I need to deal with this issue, let's create taxable personality for them. For those of you who think like I do, we have an issue, which is if it's a person, we say, for example, in our Brazilian constitution, that we should treat people equally. Should we treat a human being and AAI equally? And then you could say, well, no, because, you know, I'm treating unequals equally. You know, and then an AAI can do so much more than a human being. Well, what if it's an artificial narrow intelligence? It could just do one task. I can actually do more about AAI than about my life than the AI can do. Can't I say that they should be treated equally? That's a question that's also going to be relevant for my next and last, I think, slide. This is solution 2, taxable residence, right? So the first one is taxable personality, and that has a whole slate of questions and problems that you have to consider. But the second one is taxable residence, and I have a two-tier test for taxable residence. The first one is what I call the primary place of business, PPB. Now, the primary place of business is along the lines of what we've been discussing I discussed in this presentation, and we usually discuss when we talk about, you know, artificial intelligence having a place of business in a country. You talk about servers, or you talk, for example, if the AI runs a factory, I'm going to say it is a resident in the place where the factory is located, and so on. So I'm going to use those, I would say, physical markers that I can say, well, this physical marker is the primary place of business because it is the most important. And then a discussion could ensue, and we could ask Blazej's AAI or AI to just say to us, well, what is the primary place of business? And it would probably give us a very 95% chance of correctness of what it is and how to be implemented. So that's one way, right? The PPB, and the problem with the PPB is that it's riddled with all the problems that we have today for permanent establishments. Whereas a permanent establishment of a company, it is everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Whereas a permanent establishment of Google, can I say that Google has a permanent establishment? There are many cases that we could cite. You have the vessel, the ship that, you know, because it's in the territorial waters of someone, then they have a permanent establishment. You have the case of the sales representative that left a coat hanger and a hotel, and that coat hanger was, oh wow, he was here, and therefore you have a permanent establishment here. So you have those very flimsy cases in case law, and that's kind of the problem that we have with the PPB. That's why I devised the second tier of my test. And that's a problem, because the second tier of my test, if the taxable personality didn't get you angry, this probably will, because this is the single virtual jurisdiction. And the idea behind the single virtual jurisdiction is the realization of a problem that we have. We have a problem, we have two issues basically. We have disappearing income, which should be dealt with by personality, and we have this other issue, which is powerlessness to tax. I can't find a place that has a residence link to that AAI. I've gone through numerous PBs that I can't say are any PPB, because they're places of business. You know, we can enter into this argument. ad nauseum, and then that's the point. We might get to a point in which we are not able to sort of attach the artificial intelligence to a single jurisdiction for residence purposes. The only solution for that, as I saw fit, and I'm still discussing, you know, people might come up with different solutions, is a single virtual jurisdiction. I would just say that that AI is resident of a single virtual jurisdiction. That creates a few things. First of all, I'm able to withhold income taxes every time that I make payments, because that's important. For example, if a company in Brazil hires a service of an AI and then makes a payment to that service, it is important for Brazil to know if that payment is going to a virtual wallet of someone that is a resident of Brazil, that's one kind of taxation, or someone that is a resident of another jurisdiction, that's another kind of taxation. It is important for countries to know which is which, net basis or gross basis, which kinds of taxes can I apply. So in the single virtual jurisdiction, at least you know it is a resident of somewhere. And I given that somewhere a name, single virtual jurisdiction. It has a problem, of course. There's a few problems. But one of the most important problems, and I'm going to stop with this one, and we can discuss other problems later, is that the single virtual jurisdiction does not have taxing powers. It does not sign treaties. It does not have a tax authority. So even if you were talking about the application of equality to taxpayers of the same jurisdiction, you would run into a problem there, because you could say, well, I can impose a withholding income tax of 80% on income paid to an AI. And I can see tax authorities saying, I would have basis to do that, because that money, when it gets to the single virtual jurisdiction, will not be taxed. It's basically the best tax haven in the world, and only AI systems can get in. And that's the problem. It's a solution, it's kind of a dramatic solution, basically saying they're resident of Neverland. But they're resident of Neverland because this is the only jurisdiction that we can sort of elect. That's why it requires a multilateral agreement. It's not something that one jurisdiction can say, well, the United States has its own virtual jurisdiction. No, it has to be single, one. So everybody agrees that if we reach a point in which there's no feasible way to choose a primary place of business, instead of choosing multiple primary places of business and harming the activities of the AI, which, remember, should be good for society, should be good for us. We should want those activities to go unencumbered. So if I want to prevent that, I simply say it is a resident of this jurisdiction, and I will impose a blanket withholding income tax, and I might have some calibration that I need to do in order to get to the appropriate rate in terms of equality. But at least I have one jurisdiction that I can pinpoint that to and attach that to. So that's basically it. I mean, that was the subject of that paper that I wrote. I mean, if you want the paper goes into further detail, and it's sort of has more examples, and you can ask me for that paper. But I thank you very much for your attention.
Eu acho que a gente acabou passando um pouco do tempo. Eu queria perguntar então se alguém tem alguma pergunta. E, por favor.
You assume that we are... Yeah, you. Sorry, I was the last one. So the problem with taxations begin when you have to pay for a service. And the AI, you said, is a machine that is independent from every company, every human being. So why would it charge you for a service? Like, it doesn't
need the money. Why would it need the money?
Yeah.
Well, it would still live. That's the thing that I talk about in the paper. It would still live in a world because it's not ASI. It's not the ASI time. So it would still live in a world in which it would have to interact with us, with human beings, and with companies led by human beings. So, for example, it has servers. Suppose that it's like Watson. It has a place that has servers. It needs security for its servers. Now it can build that security itself. I don't know if it has that capability, or it can hire those securities for the security guards or security company. So it can use this. It can use the money to interact with us, right? And it can use the money for its own expansion. Like, for example, Plantoid uses the money for its reproduction. So it uses the money for that. But I can see, evidently, I can see forms of artificial intelligence, autonomous artificial intelligence, that would not charge specific. They would certainly be able to charge money much less. If they saw that the competition was the prices way up high, they could charge much less if they wanted to. They could charge the optimal price, basically saying, well, I don't have any cost with labor, I don't have any cost with facilities, I just have the servers, and I can produce, I can actually cater for multiple users at the same time, like unlike a company that can do it just, provided that it has the workforce to do so.
Thank you. Another question that I have is, if in the case that someone presses the kill switch,
Okay.
where does the money that the AI had goes? Like it just disappears.
It disappears.
So no one gets it.
No.
It's disappearing money.
Yeah, it's disappearing money. Just like, for example, we have that with human beings as well. I mean, sometimes you have, cash reserves, and you have cash reserves in some bank.
Inheritance.
Yeah, inheritance. You have cash reserves in some bank and lost in Azerbaijan, and and then you never will access that money, and it will always remain there. And the difference between that is the case that the money, the account will still exist. But it doesn't. The money will disappear because it's not mine, and that's a very important point. Because if I can prove that the money is not mine, I can prove that I'm not responsible. I'm not in charge of collecting taxes. I'm not in charge of complying with legal costs. Nothing. I don't touch that money. I touch my money, and I still make money because I outsourced that very costly part of my business to an AI.
I find the two issues that you raised very interesting, and yeah, but I see two another issues that include the other presentations also, and which is from the technical point. Someone has to program the AI to pay taxes, but not necessarily they will do so. So they can just make an AI release to the world, and without any expectation that it will pay the taxes that are due. So what could it be done in that case? And that would be the third issue that I would raise. And the other one is that where would you draw the line in where you differentiate what is a taxable AI and what is not? Because are you going to tax Deep Blue, or are you going to tax Samantha or Watson or any other else? What would be the case to decide which? Why would not a company dump down its own AI so it's not taxable?
Yeah, I think, okay, so addressing the two issues. I think the first issue is it might not be programmed to pay taxes, and therefore it's not going to pay taxes. We can kind of go around that issue with a withholding income tax on any payments made to AI. Of course, it can not accept. For example, it only accepts a payment of 100, and if I make a payment of 80, that means that it's not going to accept that. So I have to effectively gross up every single payment I make to an AI, because I'd have to pay the taxes for them. And then that raises another question, which is the societal impacts, which is basically we want AI to work well for us. We want those services, because it's going to develop us as a society, theoretically. So you could work around the fact that I didn't program it to pay taxes, because you can create ways in which you can only get the money if a tax is paid, and basically that could be a cost of the client. If you want a more efficient, effective, optimized service, you have to gross up the payment because the AI is not going to pay that for you. And the other issue, which is I think that the idea of dumbing down the AI is, to a certain extent, you could do that. It's not effective to do it, but you could do it. You could dumb down the AI. But if it complies with the 3 rules, and if you can attach an economic manifestation to it, because if we're only interested, you talked about Deep Blue. Well, if it doesn't earn income, I'm not interested in it from a tax perspective. I'm interested in things that earn income. I'm interested in things that make earning income a problem, because I make payments and those payments disappear, and that's a problem for tax authority. Imagine if you had a country, a jurisdiction, that had several industries. Many of them were overtaken by AI. And all of a sudden, what the tax authorities would see would be the level of income tax collection dropping dramatically. Because they would say, well, before I made a payment to a company, and now I'm making a payment to whom? Nobody. It just goes away. So again, I think that those two issues are important, and they are relevant whenever we actually come across the first examples of AI, if we come across them. But hopefully they might exist in the next decade or so. And when we come across them, I think that they will be more controllable by what we expect from AI and its place in society than sort of tax issues per se, in the sense that the legal standard does not understand AI, which is basically what the two first issues are. The first issue is that the law does not see it as a person. The second one is the law does not attribute residence to it. And then those two are things that we as lawyers and operators of the law, we can design laws and structures that can comply with those things, and for those problems to not exist anymore.
Let me make a final question then to Blazej. And you were really optimistic, all of you, about AI. And I really felt like watching Black Mirror sometimes here episode. But is there some resistance to AI? Like I don't want to be replaced by a computer, but I like the fact that AI can help me understand case law, and the tool you've been working, studying to examine the PPT rule. It maybe in the future it can examine database with cases, real cases where the PPT rule was applied, and then use those cases in order to maybe predict the outcome of a future case that is running in courts, like predicting the decisions of particular judges. And I would like to hear from you, Blazej, how was the reaction in Europe after France enacted a law quite recently, I think it was a month ago or so, whereby they created a new crime. So using tools to predict decisions of judges became a crime in France.
So the last French case, actually, I don't know the details of the legislation, but it works in a way that it allows you to predict judgments of judges, but it disallows you to do so based on the non-legal factors, because the most predictive systems in respect of judgments rely on non-legal factors, such as the gender of the judge, the religion and sexual orientation, the political orientation, the country of origin, the ethnical origin, and systems like that already years ago, Marco, correct me if I'm wrong, reached the predictability accuracy at the level of 72-73%, whereas the top legal experts from United States, we talk about the predictability of Supreme Court in US, reached the level of 69-65, although the lawyers predict the cases based on the legal factors, the interpretation, the language of law, the previous cases, while the system AI completely ignore it. So it becomes quite frightening that subjective non-legal factors could drive judges to reach certain conclusions, and this works in certain areas of law. Not like in I think the most predictive systems are built in respect of criminal cases, and there is a lot of misunderstandings too in the research. So I think that in France it precludes only prediction based on like data regarding judges, private data regarding judges, because it can destroy their reputation, and judges should have a very high reputation. They should be very reputable. So in general, you can build something in France, but yeah, now the legislation is not very clear-cut. So where is the border of building predictive analytics system in France? It's not clear-cut. But beyond that, there are many fascinating topics we could raise, but pointing to European Union is good because you have China that does not care much about privacy. It tracks their citizens very deeply and comprehensively. They know everything. They provide them points. If you have points below a certain threshold, you are not allowed to use public transport. You are not allowed to use airport, which is Black Mirror real life scenario in China. On the other hand, you have strict data protection regulation in the European Union. Maybe less strict in the United States, but still. And if you see this global tension between US and China and European Union, something in between, you can feel that this tension is heavily triggered by technology competition, right? So where we end up in the system like China, where there will be a lack of transparency in terms of like how China is building something, and unfairness because China does not respect privacy while we must. And the more you must respect privacy, your system may be less efficient because you will have access to the narrow scope of data, where in China access to data is unlimited. Process more data, you get more AI systems. So there are many questions that, and which direction will we go in Europe, we don't know, but Europe has like this AI strategy for next years. In Geneva, we will talk with United Nations about robotics and tax compliance based on automatic systems. And I think that United Nations will try to use experiences with AI in EU governments to help African countries and some Asian countries that suffer the lack of access to such technology in order to bypass the gap in the area of taxation. Like if you want to send people and from Sweden, which happens right now, to African countries and to teach them international taxation, it will be probably much more costly and less effective than provide governments of Lesotho and some other Nigeria with AI tools that will be able in their languages, English or local language, recommend them the taxation. But I'm not saying about like pure AI support of governments in Africa or other least developed countries, but like combination of the human lecture and then follow up with AI tool in order to make world more equal in the area of access to knowledge that is pivotal to deal with tax disputes, tax cases, and so on. And this is a kind of bridge with what said Lucas, because for me, if we have a world that in which we live and the autonomous AI will be expanding, it means that the autonomous human beings' contribution to produce income will be depleting. But if you attribute the income to the countries where the human force will be more and more meaningless, like Professor Oberson was recommending, from the fairness perspective, taxation, fair taxation, it's smart. But from the taxation of countries that contribute to developing of autonomous AI will be very unfair. So we will need to, I think, find multinational solution and some consensus how to define the autonomous AI. And sorry that I jumped from the question about France to that, but it's all interconnected. But so far we don't observe any follow-up to French approach, only in France.
Just a minor complement to his point about France, because the French law we are talking about, it is, as he pointed out, is concerned with personal information, and it specifically forbids the divulgation to the public of models that create predictions based on individual characteristics of judges. So you could not identify somebody, as we have in Brazil some studies that show how each minister of the Supreme Court decides and so on. That's the sort of thing that the French law covers in automated decision, in order to prevent that kind of prediction, and not, as it has been reported to some extent in Brazil, overall prediction of judicial analytics.
That's kind of curious. If I cannot know the name of the person who will render the decision, how could the system work, right?
Right, that's quite awkward, but it's somehow related to the French legal tradition, because they usually, when they release cases, they have already a very big tradition to redact names of judges, redact names of parts, and that's something that seems quite strange to us, especially because we have lots of coverage of our judiciary, we have TV Justiça and so on.
We admit transparency a lot more than other countries. Eu quero agradecer a presença de todos vocês aqui. Eu sei que passou bastante do horário. Os palestrantes são apaixonados pelo tema e tenho certeza que cada um deles deve ficar disponível para falar com vocês hoje ou até por e-mail. Então, muito obrigado mais uma vez. Thank you very much.